servant of the throne, servant of the throne, servant of the throne, servant of the throne, servant of the throne. Prove it.
Recruits like you to give us your best on every damn mission.
I don't think you've got the brains to handle any of this gear. Prove me wrong.
You're actually not bad at this.
Thank you, sir. From now on, it's do or die, or die, or die, or die, or die. I'm loyal. Served the throne.
Every Ogryn's journey begins with a club. Well, if you play the prologue, it begins with a latrine shovel, but that's beside the point. For me, the moment I got a bull butcher, my club went into the inventory to rust. It's addictive. I eventually got a great club and used it for a while. The Tools of War update brought two more, the Brunt's Pride and the Brunt's Basher. I provided a cursory review of these new clubs in one of my older videos. This is the most complicated deep dive I've engaged in to date. Relax though, it progresses toward simplicity. This has taken me an inordinate amount of time to put together. I wanted to get neck deep in clubs. I have learned much, and I hope to pass that knowledge on in a format that doesn't require you to drift around from Reddit to Discord to Fat Shark forums to Steam community to piece all this together. Okay, shameless plug time. Most of the folks who watch the videos I make are not subscribed to the channel. If you find that you enjoy my videos, please subscribe if you haven't already. Alright, enough of that nonsense. Let's get into it. The Brunt Special Mark I Bully Club has 7 attacks. Light 1 is a 45-degree strike from right to left that can cleave and damage 8 groaners. Light 2 is the same as Light 1, but comes from left to right. Light 3 is a stab that can cleave and damage 3 groaners. It also has very good armor penetration. Heavy 1 is a vertical strike that can cleave and damage 2 groaners. This attack provides a lot of carapace damage. Heavy 2 is a horizontal sweep coming from left to right that can cleave 10 groaners and damage 3 of them. This attack provides a lot of unyielding damage. The special attack is a slap that can cleave and damage 8 groaners. The push attack is a horizontal sweep from left to right that can cleave and damage 13 groaners. The Brunt's Pride Mark II Bully Club has 9 attacks. Lights 1 and 2 are identical to the Mark I's Lights 1 and 2. Light 3 is a horizontal sweep from right to left that can cleave 8 groaners but can only damage 3. Light 4 is a vertical strike that can cleave and damage 3 groaners. Heavy 1 is a horizontal sweep coming from left to right that can cleave 10 groaners and damage 3. This attack provides a lot of unyielding damage. Heavy 2 is a vertical strike that can cleave and damage 2 groaners. This attack provides a lot of carapace damage. The special attack is a slap that can cleave and damage 8 groaners. The special attack punch can cleave 10 groaners while damaging 3. This attack does a good amount of damage to unyielding enemies. The push attack is a horizontal sweep from left to right that can cleave and damage 13 groaners, just like the Mark I. The Brunt's Basher Mark IIIb Bully Club has 10 attacks. Light 1 is a horizontal sweep from right to left that can cleave 9 groaners, damaging 3. Light 2 is just like Light 1, but comes from left to right. Light 3 is a vertical strike that can cleave and damage 3 groaners. Light 4 is a 45-degree strike from left to right that can cleave and damage 8 groaners. Heavy 1 is an uppercut coming from right to left that can cleave 10 groaners while only damaging 3. Heavy 2 is a 45-degree strike from left to right that can cleave 8 groaners and damage 3. The special attack is a slap that can cleave and damage 8 groaners. Special attack uppercut is like Heavy 1 but can cleave and damage 8 groaners. In total damage, it's about 75% of the Heavy 1 and is spread across more targets. The push attack is a downward strike that can damage 3 groaners. The push attack follow-up is a light attack strike down that is identical to the push attack. I just want to reiterate that the Mark IIIb has 10 attacks. 10 of them. Let's take a break and get really simple. Let's talk modifiers. All clubs have the same modifiers. Damage is the most important modifier for clubs for obvious reasons. Simple as. The next most important modifier is penetration. Here's an example of two Mark II clubs that both have 80% damage. The video on your left is one that has 80% penetration, and the one on your right has 35% penetration. With a heavy 2, the attack that does the most damage to Carapace, the club with 80% penetration or 118.48% heavy attack damage versus Carapace, does 626 damage. Using the same attack, the club with 35% penetration or 93.23% heavy attack damage versus Carapace does 493 damage. You can also see a preview of what Finesse provides regarding attack speed. Let's determine the modifier value required for 100% heavy attack damage versus Carapace. If you solve for the difference within the range of 73.6 to 129.7, you get 56.1. The difference between the low end of 73.6 and 100 is 26.4. Divide the two, and you get 47.06. So between 47% and 48% is what is required for 100% of your heavy attack damage from the damage modifier to affect Carapace. Okay, let's work the two damage values we have backward to determine the damage we should get at 100% armor penetration. The 0.45 difference between 528.8 and 528.35 can be explained by my truncation of decimal points. This second set of calculations tells us that the extra 18.48% penetration beyond 100% definitely adds to the damage total. This is important. You don't need to remember this math, just remember that we proved this fact. We'll circle back to this later in the video. Damn it, Cash. You said this would be simple. It is. Kind of. The third most important stat is Finesse. Unlike other weapons with this, you do not get weak spot or critical damage bonus. For clubs, Finesse only provides an increase to attack speed for heavy and light attacks. In a moment, I will show you what this looks like at two extremes on the Mark II club. On the left, you will see a club that has a 79% Finesse modifier, and on the right, you will see one that has 23%. This translates to an increase in base attack speed of 11.63% for the club on the left, and 3.69% for the club on the right. The video will cut off once a club finishes 3 sets of light attacks, and will do the same for 3 sets of heavy attacks. The difference between the two clubs is about 1/2 second for light attacks and the same for heavy attacks. It doesn't seem like much, but in game, these feel completely different. It's difficult to quantify the feel of something, but how it feels to me is why I place this in third. Mobility and defenses are tied for the least important. I personally want an even spread between them if possible. Mobility is your sprint speed, dodge distance, and dodge limit. These are all pretty important to me as I like to be able to move around as much as possible. Unfortunately, defenses directly affects your sprint cost and your push cost. Remember that the push attack for the Mark I and Mark II clubs is the highest cleave attack that damages the most number of targets. The push attack for the Mark IIIb and its follow-up is a very quick way to get some decent damage on a single target, armored or not. You have to push to access these. Additionally, pushing is your main mechanism for recovering control of a fight that has gotten out of hand. In a moment, you will see what defenses looks like at two extremes on the Mark II club. On the left, you will see a club that has an 80% defenses modifier, and on the right you will see one that has 29%. The video will cut off once stamina has been depleted from pushing. As you can see, the club with the lower of the two values has about half the number of total effective pushes that can be performed before running out of stamina. So, roughly 5 at 29% versus 10 at 80%. That's kind of a big deal. Stamina is crucial to survival in this game, especially at the highest levels of play. I would argue that defenses is more important than mobility, but not at the expense of having a negative movement rate and a dodge count of 3 instead of 4. Disclaimer, I am always running heavyweight and occasionally knock 'em down, beat 'em up for blessings testing. I am testing rank 3 of all blessings. Confident Strike. Plus 5 to 8% toughness on chained hit. This works on all the clubs. I presented the functionality of Confident Strike in my Latrine shovel video, showing that you can miss your target completely. As long as you continue chaining attacks, Confident Strike will trigger on your next hit. I only run this on one of the clubs. Haymaker. Plus 1 to 4% to insta-kill human-sized enemies on chained heavy hit. Stacks 5 times. How can you not be intrigued by the presentation of the word insta-kill on a blessing description? I showed this in my 3 Stubbers, 3 Clubs, 1 Ogryn video, and how it increases horde clear speed. Each target cleaved grants 1 stack of Haymaker, and each target that takes damage from a single attack has a chance to die instantly. It would be like if each pellet in your Ripper shot had independent chances to crit. Dealing with the vast numbers of enemies isn't really an issue the clubs have. Killing vast numbers of enemies quickly is. This blessing helps to address that problem. I really like this blessing on 2 of the 3 clubs. By the way, Crushers and Bulwarks used to count for this, but that was fixed. However, currently, Mutants still do. Momentum. Hitting at least 3 enemies with an attack restores 7.5 to 15% toughness. Momentum works on all the clubs. To me, it's overshadowed by Confident Strike in general. You will not always be able to hit 3 targets due to either a lack of targets or due to hit massive enemies. I'm not a fan. I'll run it if I have it, but if I'm looking for a blessing that provides toughness generation and Confident Strike is available, I'm aiming for that. Perfect Strike. Critical hits ignore hit mass bonus from armor. I have found nothing interesting about this blessing. Here's an example. With this weapon, I can hit a single Crusher for 365 to 388 damage with Heavy 1 from the Brunt's Pride Mark II. The 365 is base damage, and the 388 is with 5 stacks of knock 'em down, beat 'em up, which I don't always get because what I'm hitting is stagger immune from a recent stagger. If I crit, I can hit 3 Crushers. The first for 419, the second for 61, and the third for 13. That's a total of 493 damage. Taking the lower value of 365, as I had no stacks during the crit, when comparing total damage, a crit provides you with a 35% increase, 5% of the time, at base crit chance. This translates to a whopping 1.75% increase in total damage. Yowza. Let's say you're running Smackdown 4, providing you an extra 10% crit chance after special action hit, and you're running plus 5% crit chance for one of your perks. This bumps you to a 20% crit chance and increases the overall total damage provided by Perfect Strike to 7% against Crushers. Looking at this footage, I take back what I said earlier. There is something interesting going on here. You can see the buff icon for Perfect Strike pop up before I land the blow. You know, if this allowed you to stagger the other 2 Crushers on a hit, I still would not run it. Take it if you want, but to me, Perfect Strike is very underwhelming. It would obviously pair well with Smackdown. Who knows? Perhaps in patch 13, with the skill trees, this may make more sense. If Ogryn were able to really ramp up their critical strike chance, I could see this on the Brunt Basher Mark IIIb for some dumbfoundingly simple left-click spam. However, the crit damage for clubs isn't good, to say the least. Skullcrusher. Target receives 1 to 4 stacks of 5% damage on stagger, lasts 5 seconds. The Mark I Bully Club's Heavy 1 goes from 416 to 567, a 36% increase at full stagger from Crusher 3 against flak armor. Light 1 goes from 96 to 111, a 15% increase at full stagger against Infested. Dread Raiders, who are quite difficult to stagger, sees Heavy 1 go from 352 to 480, a 36% increase at what I'm assuming is partial stagger. Heavy 1 from the Mark I will initially do 604 to a Reaper, followed by 717, roughly 18 to 19% damage increase while on the ground, which is what I'm assuming is full stagger. However, the Crusher receives 755, a 25% increase from Heavy 1 the moment just before fully recovering. This works on all the clubs, but I'm focusing on the Mark I because it's the best example I have to show how strange this blessing's behavior is. With rank 3 Skullcrusher, I'm getting 3 stacks of plus 5% damage on staggered enemies. It appears that the amount of stagger scales the 15% extra damage. I'm also assuming this percent increase is multiplicative, as we're getting values higher than 15% extra damage. This is an odd one. It's a pretty decent blessing and is a top pick for me on one of the clubs. Smackdown. Plus 4 to 10% critical chance for 2 seconds on special action hit staggered enemy. This is the blessing bash on cleavers, but only 66% is effective. And if you've watched my cleavers video, you know what I think about that. At most, you're going to get a 20% crit chance if you have Smackdown 4 and plus 5% crit chance for a perk. The crit damage bonus on all the clubs ranges from 14 to 15% across its attacks, except for the special attack, the slap. It has a 0% crit damage bonus. Say you can get 2 attacks off during the 2-second window, and the special attack takes 1 second. That's 3 seconds required to allow 2 attacks, a 20% chance of increasing your damage by 14 to 15% or 3% increase on average. Since the special attack doesn't provide crit damage, we'll reduce the overall damage increase by 1/3. Now we're sitting at 2% increased damage on average if all you do is special attack, attack 2 times, and repeat. Smackdown's going to be a hard pass for me. Thrust. Up to plus 5 to 20% power scaling with charge time, heavy attack. Stacks 3 times. With rank 3 thrust on my Mark 1 Bully Club, I go from 604 damage to 876 damage, a 45% increase. Thrust functions properly on all the clubs and, as always, is a solid choice. I run this on 2 of the 3 clubs. Going back to what we learned from the damage variability with the Skullcrusher blessing, I'm assuming the extra damage for power, a 1-to-1 ratio, doesn't have multiplicative effect on damage output. Thunderous. Target receives 1 to 4 stacks of 5% brittleness on hit, lasts 5 seconds. Brittleness does not add damage to attacks that already have 100% armor penetration. Through my research, I have found various comments on posts regarding this. A little digging was required. This would explain everything I've seen that is wrong with Thunderous on the Latrine Shelva heavies and the impact damage from the Rumbler. You will find links to those videos in the description if you're curious. I will timestamp them. Attacks for the Mark 1 Bully Club that have at least 100% armor penetration are Heavy 1, Heavy 2, and Light 3. Lights 1 and 2 will go from 36 damage to 80 damage on this weapon. These numbers will vary depending on your damage and penetration modifiers. That is a damage increase of 122%. That's pretty amazing. But at over 2500 health for a Damnation Crusher, you're entering into Mark 4 Cleaver territory in effectiveness of light attacks. Thunderous works on all the clubs, but be aware that most of the attacks you would use against Crushers won't benefit anything from Thunderous. It will help your light attacks and your teammates' attacks on Crushers if they aren't already sitting at 100% armor penetration against Carapace. This could be cool on the Brunt Basher Mark 3B for Flak, but mine is already sitting at around 85% armor penetration for light attacks against Flak. I go from 118 to 124, a 5% increase in damage. To me, running Thunderous is like running Rending Shockwave on the Trauma Staff. The charged attack already has 100% armor penetration against Carapace, so running this gives your team more armor penetration, and that's it. If you want to be a debuffing support character, run it. On higher difficulties, people tend to gravitate toward being able to cover armor penetration with one of their 2 weapons. To me, support is not why I'm bringing a club. There are some inconsistencies found within the data points I've laid out here. The Light 3 from the Mark II is classified as Relentless, a wide attack that staggers many enemies at once. So this must be why I can stagger 8 Groaners while only damaging 3. Looking at the newly reworked Battle Maul and Slab Shield, its Light 1 is also classified as Relentless. However, it can cleave and damage 9 Groaners. They have pretty much the same attack pattern as well. The penetration modifier can go beyond 100% for heavy attacks versus Carapace, and this boosts the damage. We proved this. The Blessing Thunderous does not behave this way. The general consensus across the Darktide community is that anything over 100% armor penetration does not get the boost in damage. This, as far as I can tell, is an accurate observation that is backed up across various weapons that provide the brittleness debuff, yet don't provide additional damage for some attacks. My quandary is, should this be the case? It's inconsistent, which ultimately leads to confusion among players who take the time to look. Blessings descriptions should be intuitive. If there are exceptions to the rule, they should be in the description of the blessing. I read that you can stagger the bejesus out of monstrosities with the Mark II's punch. If any of you have seen a video on the Darktide subreddit going around concerning the Latrine Shovel's special attack trivialization of the Chaos Spawn, you can see why I got a little bit excited about this prospect. Alright, I can take a less than ideal heavy attack pattern, looking at you Mark I, to be able to have some incredible utility in game. Couldn't wait to try it out. Unfortunately, it is complete nonsense. I had also read that the Mark II's punch could decimate Reapers since it has incredible unyielding damage. This is kinda true. The punch does a surprising amount of damage and stagger to Reaper's weak spots. Unfortunately, they love to run away the moment you get in their face. Technically it's correct, but in practice it's kinda hit or miss for me. Man, you know what we skipped? The damage sheets. Fortunately, we don't really need that level of detail here. It's time to get real practical with the current state of the clubs. For the Brunt Basher Mark IIIb, I run Skullcrusher and Confident Strike with damage to flak and Infested. I run the plus Infested damage so that I can 2-shot Poxwalkers instead of 3-shot. When do I run this weapon? When I'm wanting the Bull Butcher playstyle, but there is already good horde clearing in the group. I can't always count on it, but typically this means a heavy sword, a Bull Butcher, or a Pergada staff. The flak damage this dude brings to the table for light attacks is fantastic. I wish mine had a bit more penetration, but honestly I dig the movement speed I get with this piece. For the Brunt Special Mark I, the OG, the Klob, I run Thrust and Haymaker. This weapon suffers a bit for horde clearing, mostly because you can only damage 3 targets at a time for most of the attacks, and the light attacks are rarely worth throwing. Haymaker helps accommodate for this. The heavy attacks are focused on Carapace and unyielding damage already, so adding that in for perks is only a boon for this weapon. With plus 25% to Carapace, if you can land fully charged heavy 1 attacks to the head of a Crusher, you can 2-shot them. It makes quick work of Bulwarks and Reapers as well. You can see in this gameplay that the team is starting to fold. Dumping heavy attack spam while dancing around like I'm wielding the 2-handed hammer in Vermintide, we don't really give much ground. If I were running my typical setup, a Bull Butcher and a Ripper with Can Opener, this scenario would have gone differently. I would have stabbed the first Crusher, who would have staggered, then I would have shot my burst into the next Crusher, doing very little damage. I would then have to stab wildly, and then dump ammo wildly. With this club, I can just spam the life out of this pack that is a nasty mix that is meant to end your run early. It's a teamwork check. For the Brunt's Pride Mark II, I run the exact same setup as the Mark I. For both the Mark II and the Mark I spam heavy attacks almost exclusively. I'm still getting used to it, being that I typically either run a Bull Butcher or a Power Maul, but it's very, very effective. For the Mark I and Mark II clubs, I'll typically run a Mark VI Ripper with Blaze Away and Fire Frenzy. I would prefer Maniacs and Flak for the perks, but you know that RNG plays dirty. I like the Mark VI because of the very manageable recoil from hipfire, the very wide spread you get from braced fire, and how efficient it is on the old ammo pool. It's a devastating extension of melee if I have to reposition or if I need to make some room because I've made a mistake. For the Mark IIIb, I'll either run any of the Rippers, a Gorgonum Stubber, or a Rumbler, depending on what the team needs. I tend to run the latter if I'm in a public queue, as the Rumbler has a magical way of creating some space to reset hordes or to create some space for allies in trouble if I've already popped my charge. For feats, this is how I'm rolling these days. 1-1-1, 2-1-2. Looking at gameplay footage while running the Mark I or Mark II, I rarely am over 5 stacks for knock 'em down, beat 'em up since I'm throwing heavies so frequently. Additionally, I'm typically hitting the same target at least twice, and they're stagger immune most of the time, so I get 0 stacks. I've personally been digging payback time. I know. I play so that I don't take damage and all that. Look, I play Ogryn. I play very aggressively. I take damage. I will take hits to get you off the floor. I do not care. I will die to get you off the floor if I think it's the best play we have. I take hits, and whether or not you'd like to admit it, so do you. Chip damage from a Groaner while you're laser focused on bonking a Crusher in the mix happens all the time in Shock Troop Gauntlet. I'll take the extra 20% damage all day long. All day. Don't be ashamed to take this feat. If you can't get 10 stacks of knock 'em down, beat 'em up every time you throw in heavies for 5 straight seconds, this feat wrecks. You can also choose when you want the damage, similar to how you can choose when you heal on Zealot, utilizing Holy Revenant. Recommendations. Rework the number of targets damaged by attacks across all the clubs. All targets that are staggered from cleave should receive some damage. This should not come at the expense of the damage the first target receives, as clubs are already struggling with meaningful breakpoints from light attacks. All blessings that apply rending or brittleness need to allow damage beyond 100% penetration. Extra penetration should equate to extra damage. Extra critical chance coming from blessings doesn't mean much when the critical damage spread is so lackluster. Either boost the critical damage spread or change anything that provides critical chance to give power instead. Having timers on blessings makes sense if it provides a lot of benefit, like Slaughterer. For something that provides a little benefit, have it set to expire after so many attacks. Tenderizer from Cleavers is a perfect example of what could replace Smackdown. That bump in power should also come along with a very meaningful breakpoint for either damage or stagger. For instance, if the Mark IIIb could effectively stagger a Dreg Rager after a special attack with the following 3 light attacks, something, that would change its effectiveness. Skullcrusher, and this is across all the weapons I've tested with it, is all over the place. It appears to scale the stacks of plus damage percent based on either the severity of the stagger or the length of time in a staggered state. The last 5 seconds part of the description doesn't jive with what I've seen from the likes of Headtaker or other buffs that have a time period in which they're active. I'd rather this provide a predictable damage increase against targets hit to the entire team in a smaller amount, but also drop enemies where they stand instead of flinging them all over the place. This would completely change the mechanics of the weapons it is on. Well, I'm not certain how it behaves on the Devil's Claw, but take the name Skullcrusher. If I'm hitting something in the head, it should just drop. That would be interesting to me. Perfect Strike is pretty much useless. Here's an idea. I'd like to see this give 1 to 20% crit chance, stacks 5 times, and lasts 1.5 to 4.5 seconds, and provide more cleave and targets damaged if you crit. I see all these blessings that obviously were made with other blessings in mind, but even when paired, could barely stand as a single blessing. Bump up the combo and make it a single blessing. Power is king in this game. I feel that power should be toned down a little bit overall, and other blessings need to be completely reworked to a state of competitiveness. If it were presented as, make a choice between a bit of power that increases damage, cleave, and stagger, or pick something that alters the way the weapon functions, that would be great. You already have Devastating Strike for Cleavers that has basically the same description. Currently, Perfect Strike is a copy-paste version of Devastating Strike with a different prefix and some rewording. Now, with patch 13 looming, what do I suggest? Well, if you're hard up for a club, go for any of the options I use. They're solid once you undo the W key plus LMB mentality of the Bull Butcher and learn to do the club dance. Otherwise, if you have a promising roll on any of the club variants, I'd say hold off on making any changes to it until we see what comes with patch 13 or even patch 14. My gut is telling me that we have a major balance pass or a series of smaller ones on the horizon. When balance comes, and my god are we hard up for it, I plan to revisit my videos and correct them where needed. That is the unfortunate reality of making these types of videos. At some point, they'll become inaccurate or flat out incorrect. I will always do my best to correct my content in some manner that will benefit you. So what now?
What now? Let me tell you what now. Call a couple of hard pipe hitting Ogryn